My name is Jeff Schock. I am here with Brandon Jordan, and Brandon, I'll let you go ahead and introduce yourself first. Tell us a little bit about you, how you came here.
Well, where do I start? My name is Brandon Jordan. I've been here about 3 months now. I was looking through churches. I was in between churches, and I liked your teachings. I saw you online, went through a couple of videos. I was like, yeah, he's really speaking to me. I felt like I was getting fed. So here I am. I'm a student for life. So any opportunities I have to learn, I'm
Right
in.
on.
Yeah.
Tell us a little bit more. You got a great story, and I only know I'm starting to learn a little bit about it. But how did you come to Christ, and what was your background like faith was?
As a young man, probably around third grade, my parents they started going to church. Before that, party scene. You know, we're here from San Jose, native, so it was a big party scene. 80s, you know, cocaine. I smell Aquanet. I just have a flashback of back when they used to do their hair. You know, you probably don't understand the reference.
Aquanet. No, I got it.
Yeah,
I got
you know what I mean?
Aquanet.
Like,
I remember
man,
that.
it was all about the party. So
Yeah.
a lot of aunts and uncles. Like, if my dad did drugs with you, oh, that's your uncle so and so. You know, a lot of that stuff. But we ended up going to church like 94, 95, and that's when it kind of slowed down. I really got to actually enjoy life and family. So that's what I remember mostly. It didn't last very long. Honestly, there was some scandal involved, like with, you know, people in my family. I don't want to really get into that right now. It's a whole nother podcast. But yeah, after that, we moved on, and it's been made aware to me, you know, Jesus, God, the reverence
Yeah.
for God. And I just continued living life, and parents divorced. So I was with the dad, you know, and the older brothers. The streets kind of were appealing. And I did that for about 20 years. And like I said, I've always had the reverence for God, but I've never picked up the Bible and read it, you know.
Yeah.
There was a Pastor Sonny. He was working with inner city gangs and stuff. He came out, and while I was like in the thick of it, he was contracted to work in my neighborhood, and nobody could get in there. It's a pretty rough neighborhood. You know, we're just like any outsiders. We're cool. We don't care what you have to offer type stuff. But he knew my older brother. He worked with him in juvenile hall. He does a lot of like work with the youth. And there's, hey, I know someone from there. It's my brother. So I still remember the feeling when he first came and introduced himself. It was like I was in just full darkness, and I didn't realize it. But just I seen like a light, like, oh, whoa, there's hope. Like, not everybody's like everybody I've been growing up with, you know. So I latched on to him, and I just started rolling with him every day, volunteering, doing work, like, because when you're living that life, you don't realize what it kind of, the stress it puts on you, you know, like it's just the negativity. So just any opportunity to get away from it, you will. And that's what I did. And it took a couple of years, I'm going to be honest. It wasn't like, yeah, I want to be saved now. You know, it's just like, oh, it was kind of like, oh, I know a pastor, so if I have questions, I'll go there.
How old are you when Pastor Sonny kind of comes into your life?
Probably like 23.
Yeah.
23, 24, or something like that, yeah.
What was your life like up to that point?
Oh, man. Honestly, just living for the day, whatever. We had a group of friends that I kind of grew up with. Like I said, my dad, he was a drug addict. He still has problems with addiction. My mom, whole nother state, abandonment issues. Again, we'll get into that, something else. But yeah, the streets, that was my home, you know. Guys that I met in juvenile hall or just running the streets, we all kind of had the same background, and their moms would take me and I'd stay on the couch. No one was buying me clothes, you know, no one was feeding me. And so that was, you get a certain bond, like, you know, it's your extended family, but it's your street. So that's what life was. So out of that, you kind of organize a little better. You find people you like more than you like other people, you know?
Right.
And then so, I mean, gang life, that's what, that sounds kind of corny for an ex-gang member to say, but like we don't say, oh, gang, you know, but it's like neighborhood, that's your hood. That's your family, that's your blood. You're going to kill and die for them.
How old were you when you went to juvie?
Well, first time I went to juvenile hall, I think I was 12. But first time in handcuffs, I was probably like 7.
Wow.
Yeah.
7. What do you even do to get in handcuffs at 7?
We're at, I'm from South San Jose, so there's a lot of young kids playing around. And there was older guys. Now I look back, like they were homies, you know what I mean? Like they were involved in the gangs. I had an older sister, and those are the kind of guys she liked. So they'd be coming over for their own reasons, but while we're there, they'd be like, hey, this is how you walk, you do this. You know, they're molding us.
Right.
And there were some kids on the other side of the fence, and we're just playing, making forts. And the kids were talking back and forth to us, and one of the guys was like, man, throw a brick at him. So I got a brick, and I threw it up, and it hit a girl in her face.
Oh, my gosh.
So the cops come around. My mom comes, she calls me out. I see this girl's face is out here. And I was like, I'm going to be honest, it didn't bother me. I was like, okay, it happened, you know? So they handcuffed me, put me in the back of the cop car. And as I think about it now, I wasn't scared or anything. Like, you know, let's scare him, put him in cuffs. But I didn't comprehend at all. Like, my brain was like, okay. My mom's crying crazy, and I'm just in handcuffs in the back of the cop car. Everybody's looking at me. I didn't feel cool. I didn't feel bad. I didn't feel anything.
That's weird, isn't it?
Yeah, it was just like, okay, what's next? So that was my first time in handcuffs.
That's crazy. Yeah. Wow. So you got a little hemmed up, 7, then what, 11, 12?
11, 12. My dad, I think he went to prison again at that time. So I was living at my grandma's house. I had cousins. Like, grandma's house is when mom and dad don't want to do with you, you go to grandma. She'll take care of you. You know what I mean? She's cool. My grandma Pauline. And I just started hanging out with the older guys more. You know, like I'm 11, 12. You know how certain tribes you have to, what do they call it when you have to become a man? Certain rituals.
Rite of passage.
Rite of passage. There you go. So like I said, I was never like a bad kid, mean kid. It was just like, seemed like I was coming into manhood. So when they were going, I'd say, all right, let's go. You know, and I'd be in the car, and whatever we do, I'd jump out the car first, and that led into meeting other kids mostly it's family stuff, you know, like it's pretty much family that we hung out with.
Right.
And I think we robbed a liquor store for ice cream, beer, cigarettes. Got caught, ended up in juvenile hall.
Right.
The older guy I was with told on me, said it was my idea. So that was my first, like, wait a second, you're not sticking to the code, you know? But,
right.
Yeah, weird. But that's how it was. But that kind of opened the door, because now I'm on probation. Anything I do, I go right back. Mm-hmm. So I never even went to high school. I was always
just in and out,
constantly on the run, cutting off ankle monitors, going to this ranch, going to that ranch.
Oh my gosh. All right. So you 18-ish, did you graduate? Did they just like pat you on the butt and say good luck?
I got out of the second ranch. I didn't graduate. The credit, they give you a pencil this big, give you packets. Like, basically the longer you're there, the more credits you get. But I was on the run most of the time, because I like to pride myself in being a little bit sharper, you know, like a little smarter, like, that's cool. So I'd shake a lot of situations I wasn't feeling, but once I turned 18, they have to let you off, you know? So I was off, and I caught another case within months. Yeah. So
then you run into Pastor Sonny.
He comes into our neighborhood.
Yeah.
So and I'm a little upset with my brother, because he knew him the whole time, you know? Like, I didn't know there was any other life than this.
Right.
But yeah, he comes, and he wasn't Bible thumping. It wasn't, you got to change, nothing, just building the relationship, you know? And like I said, just being around a positive person, that was enough for me, because everybody else was trying to steal from me, wanted me to go do dirt with them, wanted to kill me secretly, thought I was looking at their girlfriend, or, you know, like everything is just negative. And I just wanted to be around someone that wasn't a threat, that actually cared.
So you meet this guy, there's something different about him. You start hanging out with him. What happened there, and how did you come to a point where you decided to trust in Christ?
Well, he would invite me into church every now and then. I'd go, and for my daughter, you know, just come on, teach my daughter there's something better than what we have. But mostly I was curious as well, you know? And it started with that. Thanksgiving, he'd invite us over, like, to his family. It'd be nothing but his, like, kids, and I'd be there with my kids, because I have full custody of my kids at the time. You know, it's just literally me and my kids, like, just doing my best. And so he'd open his home to us. So I just, like I said, I saw it different. His walk was different, you know? And he was always inviting me. He used to always, Pastor Jordan. I'm like, okay, cool, you know, I'm sure. But it took a couple years, and then finally there was a point in my life where I was still doing what I was doing, but I mean, as you mature, you kind of get smarter. You move up into different positions to where you're not the one in the street doing the dirt.
Right.
You're kind of overlooking, make sure everyone's safe. But it was getting to the point where it started getting really bad, as far as jealousy and drug use and people thinking all weird stuff. And I always had that relationship with Pastor Sonny, but I had to pray to God because that loyalty I had to them, you know, I to a fault. Like, yeah, they do this. Yeah, but when I had nothing, I was on their couch. When I was starving, their mom was feeding me, you know?
Yeah.
So I still remember the prayer that I asked. I just told God, I asked God, I said, if they don't care about me and my family, like for real, like if they do not care whether we live or die or if they're all about themselves, make it obvious to me, like a slap in the face, like something I can't deny.
Yeah.
Because I even justified their actions.
Yeah.
You know, like a codependent relationship. And I got exactly what I asked for. Like, it got bad to where I was, okay, thank you. And when that happened, I just, when people like accuse you of things or something, you just got to take care of it. And I was normally like, oh, someone said something about you. Cool, I'll be there. Where you at? Like, pull up. Let's end this right now. And that usually ends well. But I just stopped putting the energy into that.
Yeah.
And I was like, okay, if that's how you feel, then cool. And then an opportunity came up to where I could walk away from that lifestyle and there's nothing bad that can be said about me and it's on good terms, but we're changing a certain amount of things. And if you don't like it, you can leave. And I was like, cool.
Yeah.
I'm out. And they didn't like that at all.
Okay.
Yeah. So during all that, that's when my faith grew as far as with God, trusting him. And Pastor Sonny's telling me, hey, even your enemies will be at peace with you. And, you know, God's here to protect you if you're walking as well. And
Yeah.
that I seriously, that built my faith more than anything.
Huh.
And then I had a encounter with God, and that, any doubt that I had, I audibly heard him talking to me saying, trust in me, I'm your God. And I was not a drug addict. Everybody's drinking. I never drank. I don't even drink coffee. Like, you had to kind of give me some tea and I still jittery, you know? So it had to be God. You know, and that day I just dropped on my knees and I started crying and I fully surrendered. I don't know anything.
How old were you?
This was in 2019.
Wow.
So, yeah, I was 33.
33 years old.
33 years old.
Wow. Man, that's a story. And you talk about, you know, I know you had a lot of barriers and obstacles in front of you. But then I love the way that, you know, God used one man's obedience, Pastor Sonny, who we're going to have to meet now.
Yeah.
Right. And he used that to kind of really just do something crazy in your life. Right. So what about the rest of your family now? Are you the only Christian, like your brothers?
Well, I have 6 brothers and sisters. The ones in California, I have an older brother. He's my half brother. But the day I had that moment where God told me, trust me, I'm your God, because I had a million questions going in my head. It's a short story, but that's basically what happened. I was like, yeah, but this, but that, and this, no. Right. And he said, listen, trust me, I'm your God. And I'm like, where is this coming from? But that day, I went straight to my family because my dad, even though he's an addict, he still has his faith. And if that's good enough, I don't know. I mean, who am I to judge? But he wrestles back and forth. One day he's reading the Bible, the next day he's drunk, beating up the guy at the liquor store. So I went and I told him, it's real. Like, do you guys realize what's happening here? Like, God's real. Like, everything we think that we know is out the door. Like, wow, do you guys know this? And that day, my younger brother, Martin, he's like, all right, I'm with you. Let's go. And then everybody in my immediate circle, they were like, okay, we trust you. Let's start going to church. Like, teach me, you know?
That's awesome.
So I had a group. To this day, I got like 12 people. Every morning I send them devotional scriptures. And like, they put me in that position of trust. Like, you know, because even in the streets, I'm not saying, oh, some big guy, but I was trusted. I had a good reputation to where I had a good head on my shoulders, you know? So those people who looked at me then, they're like, well, I trust this guy with my life. Like, what now that it's religion? No. So there's been a good amount of people that converted with me.
Yes, there's so much that's fascinating about that story, you know. And so you've been, like, God kind of used some of your experience and some of your past, you know, where you came from. You're doing outreach to guys who are in a similar situation. Tell me a little bit about that.
Well, right now, before that, I find this interesting. Like that, I had a road to Damascus before I even knew what that was, you know? So as I read more, the more I see like how God's hand was in things. So COVID happened right after that.
Right.
So at this time, I'm like, there's a God. If we're going to spend our time doing anything, let's get to know him. What does he want? What do you want? You know, like, come on. I never had a male role model that was positive. Like, let's go. You know what I mean? So I spent that whole time, I told myself, I'm going to give at least an hour a day, listening to a sermon, reading the Bible, going to some kind of class. Like, I gave an hour a day. It's the least I could do, you know? I got kids, I understand that. So I made that promise with God. And that since, right, like before the pandemic, but an hour turned into 2 hours a day. Now I'm like 4 hours a day. If I have, like, anytime I have free time, any content, I'm going to put in my face or my ears, it has to be biblical.
You did some school, right? You went like
Well, see, when I first started out, I was like, hey, someone tell me a Bible college. I know no Christians. Like, to this day, I only know like a handful, you know? So I'm asking, hey, like, what classes do you offer, you know? And I ended up doing one. But they were like 5 gifts of the Spirit type stuff, and I was like, okay, cool. But I was looking more for, like, I want biblical, like, that's cool, but I don't feel like I'm there yet. I need to build my foundation. I want to know what this is about. So then I started off. I went to I met another pastor. He told me Northern California Bible College, just they'll teach you everything. So I was like, okay, I'll take an Old Testament course and a New Testament. You know, start with Genesis and then Mark, and I'm just building up together because I want to know the full story. You know.
Yeah.
And I should be set to graduate January.
That's great.
Yeah, we're in November right now.
That's awesome. Yeah, and man, I did seminary. I did a master's degree, and it's good, but there's no replacement for just getting after it on your own and being curious and really just diving into the deep end of the pool and, you know, having a regular practice of reading and studying and stuff like that.
Yeah, I've grown a lot through that, and I like learning from a teacher or you know, because they already got it figured out. Like, I feel like you did all the work for me, you know? Like, when I come on Sunday and you're here, I'm like, you saved me so many hours. Thank you.
Right,
you know? And then I go right back to my own.
Yeah.
You know, but yeah, definitely studying on your own. The Bible, and the more you read, you can read something over and over and you learn something new every time.
Oh, yeah.
Like, it's amazing. I love it.
Just keeps getting more interesting.
I love it, yeah.
Yeah. So, well, I guess I should introduce myself. My name's Jeff. I'm the pastor here at Crossroads Bible Church in San Jose. My story is not dissimilar to yours, though I think maybe like a little less exciting, just a bit. But I grew up in New York. I grew up in a Catholic home. By the age of 13, my parents had divorced. My mom had gotten diagnosed with cancer, and I was a little skeptical of Christianity to begin with. And so I thought, it's not true. I thought, you know, if there is a God, he's not good, right? And I became agnostic, atheist, something like that for a number of years. And I went into the Marines, and I got out, and I stayed in California, and I was living in LA. And long story short, people kept coming into my life who were Christians, like devout Christians, and they would tell me about it. And I thought it was weird, you know, where I'm from, like nobody, like you were Catholic, but on Easter and Christmas, you know, there wasn't anything overwhelmingly sincere about or robust, I should say, is probably the better word, And so I kept meeting these Christians, and they were young, and they were thoughtful, and they were like college educated, and they were, you know, they're like, wow, you seem not as weird as I would have thought, you know. And so, and I got this part of it. There were 2 Christians at the health club where I worked, and they both happened to be very pretty girls, which I don't think hurt at all. You know, God knew. Yeah. And so they would give me books. They'd give me C.S. Lewis books because I was a skeptical, argumentative New Yorker, and so I'm reading Lewis, and I have like existential questions. I'm in my mid-20s, and you know, long story short, one day I was in a church service, and I prayed the first prayer of my adult life. I said, like, Jesus, are you there? And all of a sudden I got something back, and that moment changed the trajectory of my life. It took a little bit of time, but eventually I bowed the knee, and I accepted Christ. And it wasn't short. It was pretty soon after that I had an opportunity to do junior high ministry. And so I ended up the junior high guy at this little church in Sunnyvale, and one thing led to another, and so eventually I did pursue a graduate degree in theology, and I've been the lead pastor of this church for going on 5 years. So that's kind of how we got here, and this is our first attempt at a podcast. And so I'll speak to the genesis of this whole podcast. We recently did a series titled Questioning Christianity, and we were looking at some of the big questions people have, they've had for a long time. These are kind of perennial questions. And as a part of that series, we had a little QR code that you could scan and you could submit questions. And we were initially going to just do a live Q&A after the service, and we did it one time, and it happens to be lunchtime, and we thought we'd probably get a little bit more of a reach if we did more of an online format. So that's what we're doing here. And so we actually managed to launch a podcast within about 10 days, which was fairly miraculous. And so what we're going to do here is we're going to we've probably got about 14 or 15 questions, and we've grouped them into about 4 or 5 categories. Some of these questions are, if not redundant, adjacent to each other. And so what we're going to do is we're going to attempt to ask and speak to some of these. And Brandon's going to be the interrogator here, and I'm going to do my best with answers, and then we'll just see how it goes. All right, so
question number 1, why are there so many different Bible versions or translations?
Now, this is an interesting question, and I'm kind of curious why someone asked this. I guess it is something that maybe would bug most people. Why are there so many translations? You can pick up one and you can pick up the other, and it really seems like they're quite different. Let's speak first to the science of translation. So the Bible is written in mostly Hebrew for your Old Testament and then Greek for your New Testament. And the style of Greek that it's written in is Koine Greek. There's little bits of the New Testament and the Old Testament that are actually left in Aramaic. But it's very, very little. So you've got the New Testament in Koine Greek. Koine Greek is a dead language. It's first century Greek, right? And just like every language, Greek has evolved. And so the type of language you see in the Bible, it is not 100% similar to modern Greek, right? And so when translators go to translate those New Testament documents, they're making translation decisions based on a set of values. And on one side are the translators that want to translate the language as exactly as they can, right? And this is called the formal equivalence. If you read textbooks on this stuff, it's called the formal equivalence, right? And so their goal is to translate it exactly as the language puts it. Then on the far other end of the spectrum, there are translators, and I would say Eugene Peterson's paraphrase, The Message, is very much over here, and that is what we'll call a free translation, where the goal is not so much the exact word-to-word translation or the syntax translation. The goal is the meaning of the text, right? So on one hand, you got formal equivalence, and on the other hand, you got free. One really seeks to translate the text as closely as you can. The other one, they put much higher priority on communicating and conveying the meaning. In the middle of the spectrum is where you find most of the Bibles that have been widely accepted, like your NIV, your ESV, got a couple of them right here. Those are what they call dynamic translations, right? They're seeking to balance the formal equivalence and the free. They want to communicate the meaning, but they're also interested in getting the nuance of the translation right. So that's how you got so many of them. So on this one hand, your formal equivalence, that's like your contemporary English version or even your King James, right? In the middle, you've got your ESV, your NIV. Those are generally accepted to be those dynamic translations that try to balance the two. And then on the far side, you got your free translations like The Message or God's Word, right? And that's why we've got so many different Bible versions and translations, right? And then I'm just confining this to the English speaking world. I just had a meeting with some of our global outreach folks who are in Thailand translating the Bible into Thai. And the Bible has been translated into Thai, but they informed me that those translations weren't really that great. And Thai, like any other language, evolves and develops. And I think the translation that is commonly used in Thailand is very, very old. It wasn't a great translation to begin with. Mm-hmm. And so if the English language continues to evolve, you could expect to see more translations. In fact, like the NIV gets updated every 10 years, and part of that is probably just want to sell more Bibles. But as the language evolves and adapts, you're probably going to want to, retranslate the Bible so people understand it.
Yeah.
That's the heart behind that. How'd we do?
Yeah, no, I think that was...
Got out of that one? All right.
Yeah, it makes perfectly good sense, because I had that question too as well. Like I said, I'm pretty new to this, but how do you know which one to pick? That's
what
I would ask.
Great question. Yeah. So, for a longer treatment of this great book, Gordon Fee, Doug Stewart, How to Read the Bible for All It's Worth, they talk about the science of translation. They've got a great graph in there about the spectrum. What I would typically suggest is get 2 or 3 translations. And when you find a text that maybe is hard to understand or problematic, read it in 2 or 3 different translations. And what you want to do is find a translation somewhere else on the spectrum. Like if you're reading the ESV and you're looking at something and it's maybe a little confusing, read it in the Message and see maybe that clears it up. The other thing that you'll tell by reading different translations is you will see interpretive and translation issues highlighted, right? Like, I wish I could think of an example.
Well, they'll have like a little A.
Yeah,
I don't know what it's called, but yeah, it'll have an A, and at the bottom it'll explain
a little footnote.
This might not, a footnote, yeah.
Right.
This might not have been included in other versions. Yeah.
Yeah,
and
you'll see that.
For me, that makes me, what I was going to say too, is I found really helpful like Bible Hub. Like instead of buying a bunch of books, because I'm gonna be honest, like I don't have much room for a bookshelf. But if I go on Bible Hub, they have all different translations, and I'll go through and I'll read about 5 of them.
Oh yeah. The internet made this a lot easier.
The Blue Letter Bible, the app, you can go back to the language it was written in, and I personally do that myself, and I find it real helpful too, because you can find the original meaning in that language, and you can kind of see where it came to now. Yeah, and they have the amplified. That'll like a big explanation in the verse. So
I do like Blue Letter Bible for that reason, because you can get the original Greek word. You can look in. So there are things called lexicons, Strong's lexicon. So you can click on a word and it'll give you everywhere else in the Bible it was used, where else it was used in antiquity. Some words have a lexical range, so it'll give you all the definitions. Like if you want to get super geeky and drill it, I know you do.
Straight nerd.
Yeah. You get different translations. So what I would suggest is, get one that's somewhere in the middle, NIV, ESV, New Living Translation is good. And then get something else that's off on one of the ends. Contemporary English Version, God's Word, the Message. I'll tell you, Eugene, here's the other thing about Bible translation. Some of the translations were translated by an individual, and some were translated by a committee. I got to have lunch with Gordon Fee years ago. He was one of the guys who translated the NIV, the new NIV. I think he's been on a couple of different committees. I think he was translating the 1984 NIV, and when he was relating how they had all this horse trading going on. You got 15 biblical scholars around a table, and they're like, well, I'll give you that one in Matthew if you give me this one in Romans. And so there's all this horse trading going on. Now, I don't know that made it any less accurate. But when you do have one individual translating it, they don't have to horse trade with anybody. They're going to translate it. Like I want to say the ESV is translated by one person, whereas the NIV is translated by a committee. Yeah. And Eugene Peterson's The Message, like he had a PhD in biblical languages, so he has a really good understanding of ancient Hebrew and Greek, and so sometimes those translations they may not be formally equivalent, but they really do a good job of, especially in the Psalms, like Eugene Peterson's translation of the Psalms, because he really tries to get the poetic nature of it in there. He's not particularly hung up on translating the specific word. He's trying to translate the poem. So
Yeah, again, especially with poetry too. If it's written in a certain language and it might rhyme or have a song to it, imagine translating it at so many languages down, it kind of loses that. So I can appreciate that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
All right. So many Bible versions. That's why. That's how it happened. There's more all the time. I
actually had another question, if you don't mind, about that.
Go ahead.
I've looked into it, but some people are really hardcore King James. Right?
Oh yeah.
And some they won't even look at an NIV. I don't know if you want to get into that, but I found that a little interesting.
It was the official translation of the Catholic Church for many years, and so I think there's a lot of folks that are just hard on the paint on the King James version. Now, when you research how the King James version was translated, it was translated mostly from much later manuscripts.
Yeah.
So there are, you could make the case that it's perhaps less accurate than some of the newer translations. And I think that's why I want to say the Catholic Church now endorsed the Contemporary English Version, CEV. I want to say that was the one. And so you still do run into the hardcore King James people. And what surprises me is they're not always Catholic.
Yeah, I honestly, I don't know too many Catholic people. Everybody I've heard it from is Christian. So
Yeah. Protestant Christians. Yeah, so that is an interesting question. That maybe before my time within Protestant evangelicalism, there was that was something that somebody was shouting from the rooftops. But it's not a particularly great translation as they go.
Mm-hmm. From what I saw and I found kind of shocking, honestly, is that I wish I knew we were going to talk about this, but there's like an NIV, they leave out a nice end of, I think it was Matthew or Mark or something.
Yeah.
Like they just took that whole part out.
I want to say is that I
don't trust many people, so I'm like, who did that? Why did they do it? Why don't they want me to have that information?
I know which part. It's the story where Jesus, they're about to stone the promiscuous woman. And then he says, let he who is without sin cast the first stone.
No, that's something different. I mean, at the end, I believe it was Matthew. I don't know. We could probably add on to some notes later. But it's completely taken out of the NIV. And it was pretty essential. It's when they explained something with the resurrection. I'm sorry, I can't.
I'm looking it up right now.
Yeah.
It says, okay, not included. So they took some stuff out.
A lot.
Matthew 7:17-21. However, this part does not come out except by prayer. Matthew 18.
Yeah, that
seems
seems
Son of Man
pretty
has
important.
come to save that which is lost.
Seems pretty important.
So the reason they'll omit some of these is they'll find earlier manuscripts that don't have those sections of scripture. Yeah. And so it's interesting conversation to have. Well, when did they get added? Where'd they come from?
Yeah.
And what kind of implications, and how do we trust the one we have now? Right? Are there other passages they're going to find out weren't in there later,
Well, there's two people, Textus Receptus and the other one, Vatican Receptus or something. Right. Are you familiar? Right?
No.
Yeah, there's two basically. One, if they say it's made off of an older manuscript.
Oh, right,
the Textus Receptus is like the commonly received text, commonly agreed on. So when they say that, as far as, this is an older manuscript, I'm just saying what I learned, and this was in Bible colleges, that they found it in the vaults, and they're saying it's kind of like conspiratorial stuff, but it's interesting. I would say look into it. You might find it interesting.
Receptus.
Yeah, Textus Receptus versus. It has Vaticanus Receptus. It's a Latin, but it's.
I'm gonna check it out.
It's pretty interesting because the person that found it, there's motive behind, and I just found it interesting how there are very important verses. Like you just said, through prayer and fasting. That's pretty important, right? Why would they take that out? But yeah, no, I'm sorry to rabbit trail, but
no, that's fine. That whole question of when because I remember when they I want to say I remember when they tossed the story of adulterous woman and the let him who is without sin throw the first. Like, who doesn't love that story?
Right? Yeah.
Jesus
I
is
wasn't aware
standing
of
with
that.
this prostitute, and I guess it was because it wasn't present in the earliest manuscripts, but we love the story.
Yeah.
So
Well,
Matthew knows.
like it goes back again. Who says it's the earliest manuscript? I'm that kind of guy. I'll dig in. I need to know the truth. I'm sorry. I don't care how much work it takes to put in, but yeah, I heard they completely took that out of and they have a new China translation they're coming out in China, and they're basically saying he is without sin, and they were saying they put it in Jesus' mouth. I too have sinned. Or something, yeah, like you see how one small thing can change,
Yeah, good
That's
point there.
Yeah, you feel me? So
I think, and here's the one thing I would want people to take away from this. You can have a reasonable amount of confidence that what you're reading in your NIV, your ESV, any modern translation is the best translation that we could come up with. Because if there was something like you mentioned where, in that other Bible, they have Jesus sinning, all right? That's a
big red flag, right?
Well, that's so at variance to Christian thought and 2,000 years of it. So these things don't happen in a corner somewhere. Like if somebody makes a big interpretive decision, usually it's a committee. Usually there's articles about it, and theologians from all over the world pipe up about it. And so there's kind of peer review that happens. And so, I mean, guys that know so much more, and girls that know so much more about ancient biblical languages and all the codexes and all the places that were the manuscripts that get translated. It's what they do. They're in ivory towers. Right, big brains, all that. I'm a pastor, so I'm much more of a generalist, right? But they have this really specific knowledge, and there's a whole field dedicated to it. So if somebody were ever to go off the rails and insist on some weird interpretation or weird translation, it wouldn't pass the collective muster of all the other academics. There's usually a good amount of debate about this stuff.
That would be like
which is healthy.
Orthodox Christianity, right? The general beliefs. I've heard you mention that there's 7.
Yeah, cardinal doctrines, and we're going to get to that. Actually, next question gets to that. But I would say like the people that were on the committee that translated the 1984 NIV, they were the most celebrated, decorated, credentialed biblical experts we could find. And you had to get 15 of them in a room to all agree on something. Yeah. So we can be relatively confident. Here's the other thing about, and this is more about like textual variance. A lot of the passages that I just I was looking up here. Here's the things that got left out of Matthew. They took them out because they found lines that weren't present in earlier manuscripts. Yeah. They don't change the story at all. They don't I read those. None of them really affected theology. The addition that you mentioned in that Bible where Jesus said he's a sinner.
The China version, right? Yeah.
That would change things
majorly,
right? But the stuff that's that I'm looking at, it doesn't have a lot of implications for the main themes of the Bible, the main story of the life, the death and resurrection of Jesus, the path to salvation, the grace of God, like those kind of central things. None of the passages that are people are contentious about them. None of those really make a big difference. I would extend that too to the Dead Sea Scrolls. Like when they found the Dead Sea Scrolls back in the early 20th century, it's noteworthy that they lined up with the version of the Old Testament that we had thousands of years later. And there was like, I think, 1/100th of a percentile difference between those texts and the modern biblical texts. And so, but none of the differences that they found had any real implications for the larger theology of the Bible.
Yeah, no game changing.
No game changing.
Yeah, well, what does that say?
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah. All right, well, I think we beat that horse. What's the next one?
How can we claim there is one true faith when there are numerous Christian denominations that have different teachings, such as purgatory? And that one kind of went with another question. How can I trust the church's beliefs and practices are most in alignment with the one is truest form of Christianity?
how do we come at this? All right, so you mentioned earlier there are 7 cardinal doctrines of the Christian faith, and it's the uncontended, like these are the things that all, if you're a Christian, you have to hold these, and if you don't hold them, you're probably not a Christian. It's the existence of God. 7. We'll get them. It's the existence of God, the person, the work of the Holy Spirit, the divinity of Christ, the fall of man, the resurrection of the dead. Oh, I'm missing 2.
Come on, Google.
Oh,
Let's
man.
get it. And I think it's important to know these too. That way you kind of, because there's some persuasive people that they can preach, and if they don't believe that too, like, I mean, the sweet words, sometimes you'll just kind of be somewhere where you're comfortable, and then that's how, I believe, in my opinion, that's how other denominations start off, right? That's how you kind of go in there. I don't really believe in what he's saying with that, but he's such a good guy, and it's just a little bit of a difference. And after 2,000 years, that little difference turns into a big enough difference to where it's us versus them kind of thing.
Right.
You know what I mean?
Yeah, so I'm looking here, and people divide them up different ways. And I think if you look at our statement of faith, it's more than 7, but it's the same general ones, right? The deity of Christ, salvation by grace alone, the resurrection of Jesus Christ, the resurrection of the dead, the gospel of Jesus, the Trinity, the virgin birth. These guys have the virgin birth. Sometimes that's not included, and original sin. And so if those are primary doctrines, right? And so you can say, and let's talk about secondary doctrines. Secondary Christian doctrines are things like, we were talking about eschatology before we went on air. That's what you believe the end times will look like. If it's going to be, the rapture where all the Christians just disappear, or there's going to be Jesus coming on a cloud at the head of an army of angels and a new heaven and a new earth. Is it? So there's all this kind of debate and thoughts about what that's going to look like. Yeah. But none of those positions are core foundational doctrines. It's a secondary doctrine. Right? Yeah. Another one, we hit this one during the series too, the creation account. People hold a lot of different views of creation, right? You have modern creation science who believes it was a 6-day literal creation. And then you got some folks who they believe it was like 6,000 or 7,000 years, and then some folks believe it was naturalistic creation, that God got it going, but it really followed the pattern that the Discovery Channel tells you. So there's all these different views, but the point is this: none of those are salvific, right? You could hold to a 6-day literal creation, I could hold to 6,000 years, and we can have a spirited debate about that, and we can both still be Christians at the end of the day. Yeah. But if I say that Jesus Christ is the incarnate deity, the Son of God, and you say, no, I think he was a wise man, a prophet, or
a good
teacher, then that's a fundamental difference, and the issues are salvific. And when I say salvific, it means it affects your salvation. Like if you don't hold the cardinal doctrine of the Christian faith, then we don't know if you're you're probably not saved in the Christian sense, right? Because you're doubting the person, the work of Jesus Christ, the resurrection of the dead. These are all, you can't have the Christian salvation message without those. Yeah. Right? The earth was created in 6 days, kind of doesn't really impact that. Yeah. Yeah. So that's the question. And so, why do we have so many Christian denominations that have different teachings, such as purgatory? So, purgatory is a kind of Catholic doctrine, but within Protestant Christianity, there's sure a host of distinct, kind of theologies that are distinct according to certain camps, right? You look at the charismatic tradition, the gifts, if you will, right? They speaking in tongues and prophecy, and so they hold those gifts probably in a place that's higher than some other denominations, right? I'm thinking of my mainline friends who celebrate the sacraments with perhaps greater weight and enthusiasm than some other denominations, right? So it's still one faith, right? If you've put your faith in the person and the work of Jesus Christ, and you believe that he is the Son of God and that he rose from the grave, then the Bible says, Romans specifically says, you are saved. And then with secondary doctrines, we're free to have differences. And I don't think we should let those differences separate us. That's, I think, the key. Don't get preoccupied in the periphery.
Yeah.
One of my mentors would say, you keep the main thing. And if you keep the main thing, those cardinal doctrines are all about the person and the work of Jesus Christ, right? And so either, if the tomb is empty and you believe that, you're a Christian, and you're free to kind of have these disputes on secondary matters, but good-natured disputes.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah. I've always, because I've noticed that, like I said, I've been a Christian probably about 4 years now. And one thing I could give that I learned in the streets is that unity is very important, because you got lives on the line, people's kids that you're going to look after, like you name it, right? And when I do notice that there is divisions based on secondary beliefs, I was like, what are you talking about? We're all brothers, and I mean that when I say that you're my brother and everybody at this church. If you're a Christian, regardless how you look, if you believe what I believe, and we pray to that same God, we praise him and give him all the glory, you're my brother, period. So instead of focusing on the differences, because who knows the culture, like you and me, we have different cultures, but we believe in the same core beliefs, Right. And that will bring us together in that unity to show that love that Paul's talking about, because you can imagine back then you had Gentiles coming with the Jews, so that I like Paul, a lot of the Pauline stuff.
Yeah.
He hits that straight on the head, and that plays into the different denominations. I think a lot of people, they feel based on their different cultures and their beliefs and traditions that there's so many denominations, we're all different. Like, no, we're all the same.
Yeah.
It's just, we just have different cultures. You go to someone's house, take your shoes off. Does that mean that they're different? No, that's just their tradition that they do.
That's a great metaphor. It's a great way to explain it.
Yeah, that's what I look at it,
Yeah, it's just got a couple of different nuances to them. It was the Reformation, Luther nailed his theses to the Wittenberg door, and then you had Lutherans. It was like a generation or two later, somebody I think it was a Presbyterian church split off of the Lutheran church, and then it was the Methodists and the Episcopalians. But at any rate, within a couple of generations, one turned into four, and then it just, and I think that's the hallmark of Protestantism, right? The word is like protest. Right. That's so I doth protest, and now we have two churches, et cetera, down the line, right? All right, one more.
Okay, so on the topic of merciful non-retaliation, how should Christians think of defense of self and loved ones from people of imminent ill intent, mugging, home invasion, murder, etc.?
We pre-gamed this one a little bit, and I remember when I first became a Christian and I got to that passage. So we came from different streets, but not too different.
Yeah.
And I remember when I went to my pastor early on, I found out where Jesus says, if somebody strikes you, turn the other cheek. And I went to him and I said, look, are there any loopholes with this one? Can we get around this one? Because I don't know, this one doesn't make sense. The further I went, the more it did make sense.
Yeah.
There is a Christian non-retaliation ethic, right? If somebody strikes you, turn the other cheek. If somebody tells you to, give them your cloak, give them their tunic. Tunic. That's your
I get what you're saying.
Right. I forgot the text.
Yeah, no, it's all good. I feel it.
But there's a difference between non-retaliation and self-defense and defending, let's say, the defenseless, right? Retaliation is revenge, right?
Yeah.
Somebody comes at you and I don't know, they slash your tires or something that, and so you go find them, and then
you got to get
slash
even.
their tires,
even the score,
or usually kind of
a little worse.
Yeah, a little up, a little one-upsmanship there, a little gamesmanship.
Oh yeah.
And so that's retaliation, and I see that as being inherently different than self-defense, right? Self-defense is I'm going to protect myself from imminent bodily harm, or I'm going to protect somebody who is comparatively defenseless from imminent bodily harm. So you're stopping something bad from happening, as opposed to just trying to get somebody their comeuppance, right? Just hey, you did this to me, so I'm going to do it to you, only worse.
Yeah, I hope you learn never do that again.
Right. And I think when Jesus says if somebody strikes you on the you turn the other cheek, that's not a life-threatening situation.
Yeah.
Somebody's insulted you. That's a first century insult. So you want to go insult them. I would argue that the context seems almost, because it is an insult, it applies to all that verbal stuff too, right? I just see my kids and where they live and this whole, back and forth stuff. And I think the Christian non-retaliation, oh my goodness, the Christian non-retaliation ethic applies to social media.
Oh, yeah.
Applies to Twitter if you're Christian, apparently.
But then what would social media and Twitter be without that, right?
We got all those non-Christians making it more interesting.
Yeah, no, of course, yeah.
But I will say for the most part, like a lot of the Christians I follow on social media hold that tension pretty well. They're if they do have if they do have an indictment, it's thoughtful and well phrased. It's just not, So to some extent, I would say that is true.
Yeah.
What else do we say here about non-retaliation?
I think retaliation, to me, that seems premeditated.
Yeah.
Right? So if you have that opportunity to sit and think about what you're going to do, you have that opportunity to give that to God. And I'm going to personally speak on this about something real personal. In the culture I grew up, violence was the answer, right? Violence got you everything. If all else failed, violence. So for me personally, and this is my stance that I take on this, violence is the very last thing I want to use, because that was my addiction. I could relapse on violence. It wasn't the drugs. There was other things amongst other things, but daily, that's my thing. Don't relapse on violence. And once I looked at it as a temptation, right? The Bible says that if any temptation comes on you, God will always give you a way out. And I'm telling you, I've been in situations that were pretty bad to where the old me wanted to act out violently. But when I stopped, it took seconds. I always had a way out.
Wow.
Always.
Yeah.
God always just, whether it's putting in the car in reverse or just making a left turn, there's a couple of situations. Like, this has happened plenty of times. I've been tested many times on not reacting violently.
Wow.
When I had every reason to justify it. But I keep in mind the way I look. In California, there's no such thing as self-defense for someone that looks like me.
Yeah.
So I have to make my next move my best move every time. So I got deep in the Word. God, what do you say about this? Like, I trust God 1,000%. And it says, if you're tempted, because it's temptation, violence, that's a temptation to go back into that, if you use it that way, not even if it is a self-defense, but it's not the answer. The answer for me was trusting God was going to get me out of that situation.
Yeah.
So I wanted to add that personally. If there's a way out, get out.
Yeah.
Because California laws, the first thing they're going to tell you, I know plenty of people that are doing time in prison because they didn't pick up that phone and call 911. Me personally, I don't do that, but they didn't jump out of this way. If there's a way out, it's not self-defense.
Right.
Look at it that way.
Yeah.
My cousin, he just got out from doing 16 years. He was 16 years old when he got convicted of murder.
Oh, my God.
And he got life. But due to the law changes, they let him out recently.
Wow.
And I was discussing this with him because that's a reality.
Yeah.
I should, whatever. Prison is a possibility.
Yeah.
So he told me, he said, before you do what you do, picture yourself in a courtroom of professional people whose job it is to put you away for life. You don't have money for a lawyer to actually say what happened the way they want to hear it.
Yeah.
Look at you. As soon as you walk in the room, oh, this guy's violent.
Yeah.
Just get him off the street.
Just kind of think, how is this going to play in court?
Think about, is there a way out of this? Because if there is, take it.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? And
100%.
Yeah. So
And
self-defense, that comes in my mind.
That's when I grew up, I mean, I'm 47, so I grew up in the 80s in New York, and you could still meet somebody out by the bike rack at 3 p.m. and have a fist fight, and nobody would go to jail for that.
Yeah.
But in recent times, man, I've just seen that so often. These kids, they get junior. I happen to know a junior high kid. I think he's in 8th grade. He just did two months in juvie for a fist fight. In junior high.
Yeah.
And so times have changed, and you don't want a record. You don't want that.
like I
Part of
said,
your story.
as
you
a
know?
juvenile, that one offense caused me to be on probation to where they can violate me for anything they wanted. It took years of my life. I gave it away, but there was no rehabilitation. Nobody said, "Hey, why are you acting like this?" You know, no one noticed, like, how come you come to check in for probation by yourself? You know, like, nobody cared enough. And that's the way I look at life. I just assume that nobody else cares and I got to take care of myself and my family. You know what I mean? So that's why this self-defense thing, I don't want people to get the wrong idea, because I'm going to share this with people that I grew up with, and, you know, hopefully they learn some things on it. But I definitely stand strong on that. Like,
But you bring it back to that Christian non-retaliation ethic. How much more does that make sense? Like, if you can avoid violence, avoid violence. If you got to run the other way, like all my kids have trained wrestling, jiu-jitsu, all that stuff forever. And I tell them, I'm like, this is so you can avoid a fight. You don't want to get in a fight. And if there's more than one guy, you don't know what's going to happen. And you could get seriously hurt. You just don't know. You could hurt somebody else, you know? Maybe you didn't start the fight, but you ended up in it, and then you hurt somebody. And now you got, you know, you got to live with that and all the repercussions.
Definitely.
So, if you can avoid a fight, avoid a fight. If you can run away, run away.
And even the retaliation, if it's, because I'm telling you, that's where the war was in my head. You know, like, who do these things? You know, I could have done a lot of things, got away with. You know what I mean? But as soon as those thoughts pop in your head, I give it to God. Like, hey, God, I'll let you take care of that. You know,
I love the way you just kind of really own that. Like, He'll provide a way out.
The Word says He does. I believe it. You know, and like, if I didn't have that experience where He talked to me, I'd be like skeptical. But nah, I believe that 110%. You know, that's why I want to get back to the original as possible. That's why I'm so big on studying. But I think once you realize that there's a lot of things you got to give to Him, and I think the non-retaliation, like, vengeance is mine. That's what He said.
And you have to have enough faith that God is going to provide that way out, right? You got to look, okay, I'm in the spot, and you have to have that faith to even look for the way, right? Or else I know what I'm doing. I'm going to, okay, well, all right, I'm in a corner. I know what to do now.
Oh, no, of course. That's the easy part, right?
Yeah.
That's what I'm saying. Like, what? That's so easy.
It is.
I've been it to where there's like a gun, and I'm like, wow, it's finally going to end. And I've had the peace is just like, if that's what God wants. And He didn't want it.
Yeah.
So when I do go, I tell my kids this too. When I do go, that's His plan. I'm done doing what He wanted me to do. That's why I'm hoping He has big plans for me. That way I ain't gone soon. You know what I mean? But
don't you think it's like, it's harder. It takes more. It takes more thoughtfulness, more tactics, more self-control, more caginess to avoid conflict or to negotiate your way out. Like, it's funny. The only kind of things that ever happen to me around here is I'll get one of our homeless neighbors who might be on drugs or having some kind of psychotic thing, but I've had to talk my way out of those too. And I find that if you have to be pretty savvy, pretty cagey, pretty thoughtful to kind of negotiate your way out of a situation that could land you in jail or get somebody injured or something like that.
Yeah, because the last thing we want to do is hurt somebody else, you know? Especially if they're in a different state of mind. That's what helped me too. Like, all these people that don't like me, they're being lied to and they believe it, you know?
Yeah.
They don't know the truth like I do. And then I figure if they give me the opportunity, I'll tell them, you know? But that's definitely a skill. But I try not to worry about that kind of stuff. You know, I'd stay good in prayer, and if it happened, I worked in San Francisco for a while. Oh man, constantly dealing with stuff like that.
Yeah.
You know, and trusting God, that's I would say that's the biggest part of my beliefs. You know, that's number one.
Yeah, he'll give you a way out. He'll provide. He's faithful. You know,
you name it. He'll light your path. Yeah.
We got to get some of these stories at greater length because I'm fascinated. But I think we did pretty good this is our first podcast episode ever. So I hope you guys enjoyed it, and we're going to come back and we're going to answer some more of these questions, and we'll keep moving the chains. Brandon, thank you so much.
Jeff, thank you for inviting me.
He Chan's back there behind the camera. He Chan. All right, that's it. Yeah, yay.